Welcome to the continuation of Unit 4, Part 3. Sorry, I cut it off before it was finished, so I just made a continuation of the Part 3 notes. So it says, given that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF, state all congruent corresponding parts and the reason. Well, that means that angle A is congruent to angle D, angle B is congruent to angle E, angle C is congruent to angle F. That means that AB is congruent to DE, that AC is congruent to DF, and that BC is congruent to EF. So basically you just match the letters, and the reason that they are congruent has to do with what's called CP/CTC. All right, so the next one is a proof, and the first thing it wants to prove that the two triangles are congruent, LMN and PON. So it says angle L is congruent to angle P, LM is congruent to PO, LN is congruent to PN, and MN is congruent to OP. And the reason, remember, the first reason is always given. Now, it says angle LNM, so right here, is congruent to angle PNO, which is right here. And the reason you can say that is the fact that vertical angles are congruent, or the vertical angles theorem, either one. Then it says angle M is congruent to angle O. And the reason for that, well, if you prove that two angles of one triangle are congruent to two angles of the other, then the third angles are congruent. So this is the third angles theorem. And now you have the triangles are congruent by the fact that all the parts are congruent. So this is what's called the definition of congruent triangles, or CP/CTC. So the next one, pretty similar. It gives you QN is congruent to OP. It gives you QP is congruent to ON. Angle Q is congruent to angle O, so we'll mark that. And it says angle NPQ, so NPQ is right here, is congruent to PNO over here. So then the reason that QN is congruent to OP and QP is congruent to ON is that's given. Now NP is congruent to itself. That is the reflexive property when something is congruent to itself. Angle Q is congruent to angle O. That was given to us. Same with NPQ is congruent to PNO. Angle QNP congruent to angle OPN. Well, this would be the third angles theorem, because if you know two angles of one triangle congruent to two angles of the other, then the third angles are congruent. So the third angles theorem. And then triangle QNP is congruent to triangle OPN because all the corresponding parts are congruent. You can say definition of congruent triangles, or CP/CTC. Either one is fine. All right, so that concludes the second part for Part 3. And Part 4 will be coming soon. Have a good rest of your evening.